It's time for another NHL Action Network collaboration. Nick Alberga, Pete Jensen, and Tim Kalinowski with you. And shout out to our friends over at Bet365, Pete.
What's going on, Nick? Good to see you guys. And we got the impact of the Drysdale trade a week later. Betting-wise, Flyers playing really well. Calder Trophy. Mix opens up, as we've talked about in the past. Awards races, situational spots throughout the week. Excited about the show, man.
Tim, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here in our Action Network studios in New York City. My flight out of here got delayed, so I guess lucky you guys that you get a little more of me here with the bright lights and whatnot. They pulled out the big stops.
You're the big show. You're the feature presentation here on the podcast, so appreciate you carving out some time for us, man. Since we're on the topic, Pete brought it up. The Calder Trophy race, I think, is over. I think Connor Bedard's won it, but anybody else you want to bring into the mix there?
I mean, has he? I mean, the injury is certainly a concern. I mean, you look at McDavid's year, right, when he got hurt. I think that when you were betting on Bedard earlier in the season, you were, before the season, you were saying, this is kind of a bet on if he stays healthy. And now, that's a question mark and a concern, certainly. Even, this guy's so competitive, right? He definitely is in a race to get back, but if I'm the Blackhawks, I'm like, take your time. Okay. These guys are so driven. Sometimes that can be their worst enemy. I haven't bet any other players in that market, but I certainly, I'm not signed, sealed, delivered Bedard. I think that there can still be some shenanigans involved here with the injury.
Okay, so again, we talked about this last week too, but it is a focal point of the conversation. Number one, Bedard's already back skating. I don't put any stock in his 6 to 8 weeks. Number two, nobody has really emerged. Pyotr Kochetkov, I guess, was sniffing around, but he got hurt again. Like that's my issue, Pete, is like, has anybody grabbed this thing from Bedard? And the easy answer is no right now. And is the sample size in the next, we'll say 2 to 4 weeks he'll be out or whatever it is. I don't envision somebody stepping up and being like, you know what, Connor Bedard, I'm going to blow you off the table. Like, I just don't see it now. I don't see it.
Depending on when Joseph Woll comes back, there may be enough runway if he turns things around for the Maple Leafs because of that market and all the fanfare that goes along with that. I know Leboff mentioned that, so wanted to say there's definitely credit to that. And then one other guy to mention, odds via Bet365, Leo Carlsson plus 3,300 to win the Calder Trophy. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's highly likely Bedard's still going to win this thing. But could I envision the scenario where Leo Carlsson heats up down the stretch? Remember, they've been kind of saving him a little bit. He's back from injury. He's third among rookies, Tim, in points per game this season. I think there's enough young talent in Anaheim to maybe have him enter the chat over the course of time.
Yeah, I think it's probably correlated, though, to Anaheim has to perform in some aspect for that to happen. So you're kind of also betting on, does Anaheim go on a little bit of a run? And I think that if you just looked at the standings, that's not entirely possible. So look, I'm just trying to push back against the Bedard thing because I just think it's challenging it's a good conversation, right? Hey, I mean, this poor guy on this very depleted Chicago team already, is it enough? It probably is, but I can't give you another name. So that's like, right? It's like, oh, fire the coach. Well, tell me who's going to replace him. Like, I actually can't. So maybe I'm the one who's wrong here.
And Timmy, you're never wrong. We love you. But my greatest point I can make, just go look at who bets and who votes on the awards, the PHWA, man. They're like the sex appeal with Connor Bedard. Like, we've been talking about this guy in Toronto and Canada specifically for like 5 years. I just don't see it. I hope I'm wrong. Well, I don't hope I'm wrong, but I mean, it's unlikely, Tim. It's unlikely. We'll leave it at that. Some spots you like what are some things you've been playing in terms of NHL betting lately?
Well, I've kind of, there's an interesting phenomenon going around the league right now in that some teams, they do the whole little West Coast trip, right? They get that beat up on San Jose and Anaheim, and, maybe you throw the Yotes in there as well. And then all of a sudden they get taxed at a higher price. Like, this team's won X amount of games in a row. And it's like, well, look where they, recently went on a road trip. Maybe that helped make them a little more rich. So, I mean, I look at a team like the Leafs where, they also had that, great effort against the Kings a couple of weeks ago, baked in all that, and teams that I think I would just tell bettors to be aware of. If you're, hey, this team's really good. look at where they just went on a road trip. And I know the Jets were, they had a great Western swing as well. And so I mean, we were all anointing the Winnipeg Jets, but there's also some teams in trouble here. The Devils, I mean, that has me scratching my head a little bit. The Maple Leafs, what do we do with them? I mean, obviously, whenever something goes wrong, it's fire the coach, blow the whole thing up. And I've said this, Keefe has made those remarks about kind of calling out his stars, whether directly or indirectly. I feel like might be one too many times. Like, how many times can he do that, especially in the regular season? So, in just terms of spots, this upcoming little roadie for the Leafs here, beware, because we also know about the goaltending situation as well. Is Samsonov going to get another start? Is it too much for Martin Jones? They play Calgary on Thursday night. Really interested to see who they're going to start there, coming off of a game in Edmonton.
Plus 425, just saying, for the Leafs to miss the playoffs. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they would probably pull the plug on the coach before that ever came into fruition. But just wanted to mention those odds based on Bet365. Another team that's been, a topic of conversation here, Jamie Drysdale goes to the Flyers. He's been money so far. The Flyers have won 4 straight, including a game where he missed because of an illness. But Tim, the Flyers are now favored to make the playoffs, which is crazy to think about considering nobody had them in the preseason or in the offseason. So what's your favorite spot surrounding the Philadelphia Flyers? Are you like trying to ride the hot hand on the assist or point props with Drysdale, or maybe some guys that are improving or, heating up by association?
I would say this, from what Philadelphia has shown us, we all have been waiting for the bubble to burst a little bit. But I'll say this, from a betting perspective, Philadelphia, especially as an underdog, is about as good of a bet in the National Hockey League for an all-out effort. And when we're betting, an 82 game season, games every night, you sit there and there are teams that take off nights, and that's where betting becomes fun. And hey, is this a bad spot for this team? Can we, back to back this and that? But Philly, especially as a dog, has been as good of a bet to make for a team to give you an all out effort. And that's about as good of a deal as you can have when you're betting, every night in the National Hockey League. So I keep looking at the math like, oh, okay, it's, if I have someone getting in, does that mean Philly has to go out? And I've put Philly kind of as a given of staying in there. I mean, we're mid-January now. I don't think this bubble is bursting. They do enough. If I could say one thing, they're tough in terms of player props because they're not a, high variance type team. They're, not going to, win a lot of games 6-5. So I like more of like save props with the Philly goaltenders because they tend to have lulls in games where they get caved in a little bit, but they do a well enough job of, Hart has been great. And so I would say I would look more there if you're looking at the Flyers is their goaltender save props.
Yeah, they've certainly been a big time value buy in terms of betting this year. On the contrary, I wanted to get your thoughts on the Carolina Hurricanes. So Pyotr Kochetkov goes down, Freddie Anderson's still out. They have minimal trust in Antti Ranta. You think the next little while is a good spot to start fading Carolina a bit? We just talked about the Metro in general and surprising teams. You need goaltending in this league, and the Canes have none of that right now.
You look, that's every team in this league, right? Has been, what do we do about their goaltending situation?
True.
But I would put Carolina into the category of Philly in that, you're pretty guaranteed to get as good of an effort as possible with that team. I mean, the way Rod, gets on those guys, he actually said earlier before the season started that he was going to try and do a better job of not pressing them all the time. And, the start that they got off to was kind of like, yeah, I don't know if we can do that anymore, break glass here. So I'm actually not interested in fading Carolina. I think that there's teams that just profile as really good regular season teams. And I think Carolina, it's too hard to predict when they're going to have an off night because they have so few. And you say, oh yeah, no, the goaltending situation. Well, if you just grab names out of a hat of teams that they could, play on their schedule, I would bet you that the other team also probably has a goaltending problem because that's been the whole
True.
league.
Tim, when you're looking at some of these awards races at the halfway point in the season, where are you seeing some value? Obviously, we know like Demko versus Hellebuck for the Vezina is the conversation. You know that Bedard is still odds on. You know that Rick Tocchet has been leading the awards race for the Jack Adams Award all season long, pretty much. And Vancouver is just the wagon that continues to roll in the right direction. No regression for those Canucks.
Yeah, I have a lot already invested in the futures market, to be honest. So I think the conversation gets real interesting when we're looking at the Hart Trophy here. I mean, Nathan MacKinnon last couple of weeks has just been an absolute dog, and he's favored right now over McDavid to win the Hart. And Nick, I think it was you who was banging the drum last time I was on here that McDavid's going to be the guy because the Oilers have turned it around. They have won 10 in a row. Now that you see MacKinnon over him right now, how's that make you feel? I guess I'll take your temperature first.
No, it wasn't me, man, because
Oh,
I actually have a futures file on McKinnon to win the Hart. He was my pick at the beginning of the year, so I feel the thing I was saying last time, I think, if you recall, is McDavid has to do something outlandish or he's not winning this
right,
award. 'Cause I
right,
think
right. That
McKinnon's
was
been
it.
so great and Kucherov's been so great.
You're right. So that I think I was kind of saying to you that the bar had changed and that
Yeah.
because they got off to that poor start, that it lowered and then he can leap over it. But I will say this: if you're looking at the MacKinnon situation, and I love Nathan MacKinnon, he's probably my favorite player to watch in the league. I really worry about how often they have to rely on those guys. And it's I consume as much of my hockey media as possible. It's almost impossible to avoid through the lens of the Maple Leafs, right? And it's always, hey, why do we have to have Matthews and Marner on the ice for 25 minutes because we're chasing a goal late, and then we go in overtime? I think Colorado, because of they lack that depth that we've seen from them in the past, he's had to play a ton. And look, I know how he trains, his attitude, maybe he loves it, but they're about to play 3 and 4 here, so is it just too much for the kid? Maybe not, but that's my concern.
He's a bulldog. I love him, and certainly Nikita Kucherov is in that conversation among others for the Hart Trophy. Some other teams specifically, I'm looking at Detroit for all the conversation around Patrick Kane. He's banged up, as we know right now, but the Red Wings are starting to cook. As I mentioned on the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast, I like the revenge narrative with Alex Lyon returning to Sunrise on Wednesday, but Detroit's 5-0-1 in the last 6 games, Tim.
Yeah, this Metro race or this wild card race, actually, entire Eastern Conference is really heating up, and it's fascinating to me. I've been trying to find a way to do the math that New Jersey gets in, and Pittsburgh gets in, and Tampa Bay gets in, and that's too many teams for these amount of slots. And personally, I've looked at Detroit as a team that I think the math will have them falling out. I just like too many teams more than them, to be honest. And New Jersey is really concerning. I think it's impossible to talk about what you think Detroit will do without talking about what you think the teams around them are going to do, because there's not enough wins on the board for that. So if you're coming from the perspective, oh, okay, despite Kane, Detroit could be heating up here. Well, I'd counter with, what are your thoughts on Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay?
Okay, let me answer that. I think Pittsburgh are frauds, and I think Tampa's a middling team. I'll just be blunt about it. I think Tampa's making a big mistake if they don't sell at this trade deadline. I just don't think they're a good team. They're lacking the depth. They have the high-end guys, but they have 0 bottom 6, and they don't have the depth on the blue line, and Vasilevsky has to play every game. They don't have a backup goalie. They're going to tire this guy out before they even get to the playoffs. So that's probably my answer, Tim.
So I kind of tend to agree on the Tampa Bay point, but I've
Pittsburgh,
looked at.
no, eh?
You know what? Pittsburgh, here's the thing. In before my homework before I came on here was to find a bet that might be a little crazy, throw a little pizza money on, see what happens. Pittsburgh at Bet365, they're 35-1 to win the Stanley Cup. And to me, it's not necessarily about, okay, oh, this is a clear-cut team, they're going to go win the Stanley Cup. It's more about, if you get into the dance, how do you feel about a 35-1 ticket? Right. Nick Martin, my colleague at Action Network here, has always said he wants 16-1 or better with a team going into the playoffs. That's like if you did the math on winning the series over and over again. And Pittsburgh's a team that, led by Crosby, Malkin, the guys on the back end. I know they're thin. It's not perfect. That's why they're 35-1, but they have the DNA that they've been here before and know how to do it. So I'm really, really interested in Pittsburgh right now. But if you look, Pittsburgh, New Jersey, are all in kind of the same category of having the same difficult difficulty in schedule remaining. So whoever's going to navigate that the best. And I'm, I'll worry about the power play and all those sorts of things. But that's why it's 35-1, fellas.
Well, when Tristan Jarry is tied for the NHL lead in shutouts with 5 with Connor Ingram of the Coyotes, like that gives you a prayer, right? If you get hot at the right time, you find the right formula. You don't have to peak during the regular season. You just got to get in, like you said. And if you're getting that caliber goaltending, like Jarry has not provided that consistently in years past, but you never know. You could envision the scenario, especially with the core still intact. Plus Erik Karlsson, he is heating up right now with points. So, it's something worth dabbling in, maybe.
Well, I'll add one more thing to the Pittsburgh note. I do everything with a pen and pad here, legal pad. I barely know how to use a computer, and when I look up the advanced metrics, Pittsburgh is in the mix of those teams. More surprisingly to me, I look at 5 teams at the top of a certain category, and I'm like, okay, yeah, LA, Winnipeg, and then I'm like, one of these teams is not like the other, and it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. So if they hadn't gone through that horrid power play drought, maybe the results on the ice would be a little more reflective of what the advanced numbers are saying.
We need a Dear Diary segment with Tim Kalinowski here on the podcast. Interested to get your views on the Florida Panthers, man. They've been red hot, 9 of the last 11. I think if you want to talk Rocket Richard, Sam Reinhart is staying afloat there, of course, with the likes of Austin Matthews. But how would you play the Florida Panthers over the next little while? Obviously, we know in this league, like a month ago, the LA Kings were the hot button topic in the league. They couldn't lose a game. Like I expect Florida to come back to reality a bit, no?
Well, here's the thing about LA, and I was really strong on LA before the season. I had a future on them to win the cup. How could you not be in love with their depth, especially in the middle of the ice? But I look at LA when they went through that losing streak. I think it was 3 or 4 of them had come beyond 60 minutes, and I don't put that like really any stock into that. That is a regular season boosting number. You look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, everyone like to say they have a billion problems. Well, they go to overtime more than anyone. So do take overtime, do that on your own time. If you have a pen, figure it out with your pen and pad or your computer, figure out overtime, like by all means. But I still like the LA Kings, still think they profile well as a Stanley Cup type team. And as you're talking about the Panthers, I grabbed them a couple of weeks ago. I think 20-1, 18-1 to win the Stanley Cup. I love Florida. I think they're the most complete team in the NHL. This was not a fluke last season. They can win any way you want to play. And unless Bobrovsky, hey, he got hot last year. Maybe he goes cold at the end of the year. I don't know. But when I look at complete teams that can win a number of different ways in a league that is every team seems to be shattered or cracked in some way, I have a harder time finding flaws in Florida than just about anyone.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback off that. If you're to ask me right now, I think the Florida Panthers are the best team in the NHL, and I think they're made and equipped to be a contender in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And on top of that, I'm curious to see who they add, Pete, at the deadline here too.
Yeah, and that they're gonna try to make it work to keep some of those guys like Montour and Reinhart, of course, especially Reinhart with how he's erupted here this season. Looking at the playoff races too, is there anything you're seeing, Tim, in terms of miss the playoffs, buy low opportunities for any of these other teams? Like say the Minnesota Wild, they were really down in the dumps. Impressive win against the Islanders the other day. They just got Kaprizov back, Brodin back, Philip Gustafson back. Also, I mentioned on the Fantasy on Ice podcast, Buffalo, as maddeningly inconsistent as they've been, have a soft spot in the schedule upcoming. Plus 1,100 right now is what you could get on Bet365 on the Sabres to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I want nothing to do with Buffalo. I'll tell you that. They're too much of a headache. You said it, the wild inconsistencies. It seems every time I think this is a good spot for Buffalo. I went back and looked at them a couple of weeks ago, and it had been some sort of metric where, like, if you looked at just the box scores, it had either been a 6-1 win or like a 6-1 loss. And so they really make you scratch your head. But Minnesota's a really good team. You mentioned, I see them 100-1 to win the cup on Bet365. I almost came to the table with that as my big time long shot, but I didn't quite have the courage to do it. You mentioned it. The health is the biggest thing for them, right? If they're healthy, that middle of the pack in the Western Conference is like drawing straws. So if you add 100-1, hey, just make the playoffs and let's see what happens here. We know the style of play that, it suits their game or that they want to play, which is a playoff style. So, I don't have a hard time with Minnesota, but they just make me every time I'm like, oh, things are going better. It's massive injuries everywhere.
Prior to those injuries, they were looking like a playoff team, and then the wheels fell off. But you still can get those Buffalo odds sliced in half, plus 500 on Bet365 on the Minnesota Wild to make the playoffs. Who would they have to unseat? Like a team like Arizona? Certainly possible, right?
No, I have Arizona to make the playoffs. Please, no. Hey, our podcast, we love the Arizona Coyotes. We love
We know
them.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Lord.
So I think there might be a little too much Yotes love in my portfolio to start dabbling elsewhere. But it's very similar to the East in that when you do the math, it's like, so who's the team that you have out? And a lot of these teams are really, really flawed. So, and Edmonton's resurgence has, thrown a monkey wrench into this whole thing as well. I expect them to continue to work their way up the standings. Calgary, it's like, when is Calgary going to lose enough that they start selling off pieces, right? That's kind of what we've been waiting for. But they win just enough that you kind of can't do it yet, right? There's too much hockey to be played.
Yeah, I still think there's like 52 days, something like that, until the trade deadline, March 8th. So there's a lot of time to pass. But I think rest assured, there's going to be some really good teams on the outside looking in come the Stanley Cup playoffs. Tim, got to put you on the spot. This is the time for some plays over this week. I mentioned on NHL Fantasy on Ice, I'm throwing a sledgehammer to the Toronto Maple Leafs in Edmonton on Tuesday. I think they get the job done there. I like the Colorado-Ottawa over. 5 straight meetings have hit the over between those two teams. Any plays you like this week or on Tuesday?
Well, it's almost like you listen to our show because those were Nick and I's 2 best bets. I really like Edmonton in this spot, and it's scaring me how much I like them in this spot. The Leafs, like, usually is a better when the sky is falling for one team and the other's on a 10-game heater. You want to go the other way, buy low, sell high. But this Leafs thing, I think there's a lot of smoke to it, and when you look at Keefe. Like I said, how many times can he pull out the card of calling out the stars, right? So, and you look at this Edmonton team, they just cave teams in. And I said it like this when you're talking about the Leafs. They either outscore their problems, or over the last couple of weeks before, this past weekend, they were playing really well defensively, at least 5-on-5. Edmonton can cave you in. They're number 1 in high danger shots. The Leafs are 7th in high danger shots allowed. I close my eyes and I can see Edmonton just buzzing in the Leafs zone. So I like that there. And I'll just add one thing on Thursday. The Avalanche play at Boston. This will be 3-4 for them. I am a Boston guy, but I actually fade the Bruins a lot, which hasn't gone well the last 2 years. I probably like Boston the spot because of what I alluded to earlier with how much the Colorado relies on their top guys. 3-4 just isn't a great spot for them, especially when it's Boston on the other end.
It's so tough to make up ground in the NHL standings, but Edmonton has certainly done that. Well, which begs the question, maybe you can't count them out for the President's Trophy. It's a 15-point gap. Probably not going to happen, but you could get plus 2,200 on the Oilers via Bet365 to win the President's Trophy. I still think they have the ceiling to either do something crazy like that or win the Cup, which was my preseason pick. So at least they're making me look a little better than they did through the first 10, 15 games when I didn't know which way was up.
I'll be honest, Pete. I looked at it. I took a glance at it. My problem is it feels like the highest point you can buy at with them just rattling off 10 in a row. And also, like, this is going to come down to, I feel like, a few points here and there. And what is Edmonton? Does Edmonton get enough wins where they shouldn't win the game to win the President's Trophy? Like, that is kind of how this trophy is won. You look at Boston last year, how many different ways they would win games. Even if they had an off night, scheduled loss, the goaltending was enough. I don't know if Edmonton has that, but yeah, I mean, they're going to add at the deadline, I expect, and they're primed to go on a deep cup run. At least that's what they hope.
They're like the Undertaker gif. They were dead to rights earlier this season. They've won 10 in a row, feeling good about life. Looking forward to that game against the Maple Leafs, and always look forward to our time with you, Tim. Thanks for this.
Of course, gents. Always a pleasure, and excited to see you guys soon.
Tim Kalinowski, check him out on Line Change. Now we had some bold takes, Pete. I guess it's now our turn. You want to go first here?
Yeah, I'll look at plus 3,300 for Connor Ingram to win the Vezina. Again, Winnipeg is rolling right now. I don't see them letting up. I wouldn't be surprised if the foot came off the gas pedal a little bit on Demko and the Canucks at some point. But in general, I feel like every 2 weeks, like the Vezina Trophy, like someone else emerges into the picture. And quietly, Connor Ingram has been as consistent as anybody, really, not just from shutouts in terms of keeping the Coyotes competitive, regardless whether they're on home ice at the small rink at Mullet or on the road against any daunting opposition. So I've just been really impressed with his consistency. He has the storyline in his favor, like the feel good story too. So wouldn't be surprised if he kept himself in the conversation.
Fair enough. I'll bring up 3 teams that I like as a dark horse for rest of season purposes. Seattle's been red hot with Joey Daccord. The Nashville Predators are flying under the radar. I'd be the first to admit I thought they're going to be a bottom 5 team in this league. They're well coached. They're getting the goaltending. Roman Yossi's had an excellent year. So maybe that's one of my long shot picks, Roman Josi for the Norris. I would put Noah Dobson in that conversation as well. Very unlikely. And then piggyback off what you said, the Philadelphia Flyers. I'm inspired by that team and that fan base, and I believe in them.
Yeah, I like the Drysdale assist props, 2 for 2 so far since he joined Philly. Hopefully he'll be back from the illness soon. Other big news, Kyle Connor is back on Tuesday for the Jets against the Islanders. I saw 3.5 shots on goal for him as plus money. That is a really good one, in my opinion, I would say.
Yeah, very curious to see where they play Kyle Connor as well. Is it going to be back on that first line, considering some of the chemistry, and Mark Scheifele's banged up, and Velarde and Ehlers have looked good together, so maybe he starts on line 2 with Cole Perfetti. We'll see on that front, but make sure to check out the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast as well. Week 15 waiver wire looks, and a bit of a mailbag edition as well as we look forward to Week 16 next week, Pete.
Yeah, it's been a blast all season long. And the cool thing about from a betting standpoint is like what we were saying with Edmonton, right? I just wanted to add in addition to what Tim was saying, like there's still half a season to go. So if they don't have to go on a 30-game winning streak. They just, win 2/3 of their games the rest of the way or something, and they could get back into that conversation. Still so much time left in this season to dabble with betting-wise.
Look, if the Maple Leafs don't cover, I don't know who's going to be hosting this podcast. It won't be me anymore. I'm kidding. It happens in the world of betting. We'll see what happens and transpires throughout the week and on Tuesday night. Many thanks to producer Bob Bender, for Pete Jensen and Tim Kalinowski. I'm Nick Halberga. This NHL Action Network collaboration is presented by Bet365. Download the app or visit bet365.ca for the latest odds and find out why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be older than 19. Available in Ontario only. Please play responsibly.
It's never ordinary at Bet365.